Any questions?
Francis, speaking of unicorns, before modern science, it seems that mythologies played a very large role in different cultures, people's lives, and how they interpreted reality. And of course, modern sciences seem to stifle that a lot. Is there anything that can be said about that, or have we? Do we lose something without looking at the wonder of some mythologies that may not make sense from a scientific perspective, but nonetheless they might be pointing toward something, truth?
There are two kinds of mythologies, of, if you will, two distinct functions. One was to explain nature. These were models used in attempts to explain natural phenomena. For instance, the sun was a god, Apollo, and he had a chariot that was resplendent, shiny, that was the sun. And so he was sitting on his chariot, the sun, right? And there were horses pulling the chariot, and of course these horses were winged because in the sky, right? So it was a very simplistic model accounting for the sun. So of course these models have been replaced by better ones, and that's scientific progress. And in turn, the models we have now in physics will be replaced by more satisfactory ones that will explain a larger amount of phenomena. In fact, when I speak about science, I speak almost only exclusively about physics, because physics is nowadays the foundation of everything else which is called science. So it's a mother of all sciences, right? From physics, you go to chemistry, from chemistry you go to biochemistry, then to biology, and then from biology to neuroscience, and then from neuroscience to psychology, and from psychology to whatever. All this BS science, such as sociology, etc. So, of course, the further away you are from physics, the less scientific it becomes. So that's one aspect of the myth, which, of course, because they are replaced by much more adequate models, have become obsolete. Now there is another aspect to the myth, which is always true, and this myth symbolically represents the quest for truth. And typically all these myths that we find in all cultures, more or less, could be could be put in one description, which is the journey of the hero. This is the journey of the hero, the conquest of truth, basically. You know, so Hercules, for instance. There was, for instance, this the myth of the various works of Hercules. The Hydra of Lerna, in the city of Lerna, there was this monster which had many heads, I think seven heads. And nobody could kill the monster because that was required to kill the monster, was to kill all the heads at once, which Hercules did. So you may ask, what's the connection between that and that which we are talking about here? And the connection is this. The seven heads of the monster, because every time you cut one, it would grow back instantaneously. So the connection is this, is that if you try to eliminate one desire, that's one of the heads of the monster. Yeah, you cut it, but immediately, for instance, by fulfilling it, right? Immediately a new desire grows. You see, the only way to get rid of the desire is to go at the root of it and cut the source of all desires simultaneously, and of all fears, which is the belief to be a separate entity. You know, so stop it. I'm a good student, as you can see. I learned from the talent shows. And you'll see, I think there was this gentleman, what was his name, who he was an expert on myth. Joseph Campbell. So yes, so you can see. Actually, he met Jean Klein, Joseph Campbell. And then I asked Jean Klein, was he in ignorance? Jean Klein said yes. They met in New York. I think he asked to meet Jean Klein in New York. But I liked him. I liked the demeanor, the humility, and the intelligence of the descriptions of the myth. But many seekers interested in the truth have come close to it, but not necessarily. Anyway.
Francis, yesterday...
I just lost Campbell. One more.
Francis, yesterday you said that once
I'll be left alone with Laura.
Yesterday you said that once we understand that we are not separate, that like Newton with gravity, we don't have to remind ourselves. Now I feel that I understand that I'm not separate, and I have increasing happiness and peace, but little things happen in my life, and then I go, oh, yeah, now I realize that I'm identified with my body-mind. And what I think is that this long habit of identifying with my body-mind it's still there. That's what I think. So.
Yes, but the point I was making is this: is to To take it where you left it, the moment you realize I was identifying, because you have understood that there is no evidence that you are limited. Because not to be identified requires simply to understand there is no evidence that I am limited. That's all it requires. So the moment you went back to this understanding, you were no longer identified. So you went out of the ignorant mode, you went back to your default mode, and you remain in default mode up until you choose to identify again. So while you are in your default mode, which is your natural mode, you don't need to do anything. That's the point. You see? Then if you identify again, as long as you have not noticed that you were identifying, you are in the identified mode. Then once you noticed you are identifying, if you connect that to your understanding that there is no evidence that you are a separate entity, if you connect that to this understanding, then you are back in your natural mode. Then as you stay in the natural mode, then the peace of the background and then the childlikeness, the innocence starts blossoming in your life. I think we had a good example here.
Thank you.
Hi, Francis. I read your book, The Perfume of Silence, and I've heard you mention perfume many times. And I guess I've always wondered if it was purely metaphorical or there was a phenomenal inference.
Metaphorical.
Also. Okay.
It's just that the perfume is immaterial. If you look at the rose, the object, a distinction has to be made between the rose and the perfume. And the perfume is not limited by the rose, but it's everywhere. And although it seems to emanate from the rose, it is different from the rose. So it's not the object, it has a different quality, meaning a non-phenomenal quality, but that's why it's metaphorical. It's borrowed from the Sufi tradition. The Sufi poet Hafiz, I think, was called the perfumer.
Thank you.
Carl, is our prime function in these bodies to experience and celebrate our true nature? To again walk in the garden? Yes. And in fact, in hindsight, we will realize first that the spiritual journey after the glimpse was already walking in the garden. And then we realize that we never left the garden, in fact. We just left the garden in a dream. We fell asleep in the garden and went into a dream in which we dreamed we had left the garden. Okay. Carl again. In the example you gave in response to Rick's query of the consistency of the laws of the universe pointing at the one reality, but what of the raw properties of black holes or gravitational waves that bend the firm fabric of the oneness that is established by and within the laws. There seem to be exceptions to the laws or vanguard exotic engines of change. Do they fit in the metaphor? No, the black holes and the gravitational waves, far from being exceptions to the laws, are direct consequences of the laws. They are absolutely legal. They are absolutely within the laws. They are solutions of the Einstein's equation in two very specific cases. In the case of the black holes, there are spherical solutions to the equation. In other words, mathematical solutions of a metric which has spherical symmetry. And in the case of the gravitational waves, there are solutions of the Einstein's equation. In the case of the space, of a space-time, which is almost flat, so that linear solutions around the flat matrix can be calculated, and then we end up with equations that are similar to the equations that the solutions of which are propagating waves. But in this case, that which fluctuates is not an object in space. It is space itself that fluctuates. So we can wonder how can we, if space fluctuates, everything in it should fluctuate, and therefore how can we measure the fluctuation in space if everything in it fluctuates? But that's not the case, because if you take a stick to measure space, and if this stick is made of matter, that which assures the length of the stick are not mechanical forces, they are really electromagnetical forces. And so that doesn't fluctuate. So the stick is not going to fluctuate as the space fluctuates. So then we can measure fluctuation in space, of space. Right. He said, my teacher's a unicorn, yikes. I don't know what you're referring to. You know, you have to be careful with all this social media now. Any questions here? No more? Yeah?
Yeah, I was wondering if I still have a question I want to ask to Francis, and I think I maybe can ask question about desire for freedom. Desire for freedom, matter for freedom. So, desire for freedom is sometimes, not every day, but sometimes intense, really. Desire for freedom. It's really intense desire for freedom. And the result is always good, but it's not, I don't have that desire all the time, sometimes. Not, I don't know. And desire for freedom and desireless state. But I'm not sure what can I ask about. Yeah, desire.
Love of freedom. Love of freedom. Freedom loves itself. What desire is love plus attention. It's something you love and you don't have. So the fact that you don't have it creates a tension because you want to have it, because you love it, and you don't have it, so there is a tension. So desire is love with a tension. When this tension vanishes, the desire vanishes, the love remains. The experience of love remains. So the desire for the truth comes from the love of the truth, which is truth loving itself. Or love loving itself.
Okay, and I have one curious about the experience pure consciousness. Pure consciousness. How do I know if I experience pure consciousness during the day?
Okay, if I ask you, are you conscious? What do you say?
Yes.
Where does the answer come from? Because you have heard your parents say it, or because it comes from experience?
Yeah, immediately my attention sees and yes.
It comes from experience.
Yes, yeah.
So, this experience is the experience of pure consciousness. It's just that you look at something asking a question about the thing. For instance, you buy shoes and you ask yourself, well, are they going to be comfortable? At that moment, you don't look at the beauty of the shoes or at the price. You look how wide they are, what they are made of, and then out of your observation, you say, they are too narrow, or they are too stiff. They look good, but no, they are not comfortable. I'm not a woman. I love teasing my little sisters. I'm not pulling your hair, so don't worry. Yes, so because you have a question in mind, a specific question about the object you are looking at, you are going to get the answer to the question by looking at the object. You say, for instance, if I ask, are they expensive? I stop looking really at the shoes. I'm looking at the label, in the window, that says, that tells me the price. So I look at the object, but depending on which question I am asking about the object, I don't necessarily get the full information. It is the same. In this experience, when I ask the question, am I conscious? I'm really asking the question, is there consciousness? It's like asking for the price. And I get the answer, yes. I'm not asking the question, is it limited? That would be a different question. Or is it blue? That would be another question. Or is it real? That would be another interesting question. Is it different from me? Is it dependent upon the body? These are all kinds of different questions that, if I simply ask the question, is there consciousness, don't get necessarily answered. Are you following me? Or,
I was good. What was the last question?
The last sentence was that basically, when I look at consciousness, it depends what the question about consciousness, which kind of question I have. Because remember that my first answer to you when you said, I don't know about the experience of pure consciousness, I told you, when you ask the question, am I conscious? And the answer comes from experience, it comes from the experience of pure consciousness, because you have this experience in a timeless moment. It is not, so it's a glimpse of pure consciousness. It is not a liberating glimpse. It is an important glimpse, but almost everybody knows they are conscious if you ask them the question. It doesn't mean they are liberated. The liberating glimpse is when we realize the possibility for consciousness to be unlimited. You see? So that's a liberating glimpse. That liberates us. Because then at that moment in us, this new possibility that was asleep in us wakes up and becomes more and more possible. So the experience of pure consciousness, I want just to give you an experiential way to see that it is not something extraordinary, but that everybody kind of goes there when they know I am conscious. Now, after they went there, after they had this glimpse, which is not a liberating glimpse, they have the wrong interpretation of the glimpse. And they say, okay, I know I am conscious because I perceive objects. Not because I perceive consciousness, because I perceive objects. And others say, well, who are more sophisticated, they say, when I perceive an object and the consciousness, they are together. So I don't think that I ever perceive consciousness alone, because there is always an object with it. You see? So these objections also have to be addressed. Because if consciousness and the object were always present, we would know that there are objects. We wouldn't know there is consciousness. Or, alternatively, we would know that there is consciousness, we would never believe there are objects. You see, that's the beauty of it. That it is true, this argument, when people say, no, it is not true that when people say, I always experience consciousness with an object, so the experience of consciousness without object, I don't experience it. Because when there is an object, it cannot be separated from the consciousness, in my experience. That part of their objection is right. But the logical conclusion of this that they derive is wrong, because we can derive two conclusions, either that there are all kinds of objects, which is the conclusion they derive, or we can derive the conclusion that there is only consciousness, which is not the conclusion they derive. So because when there is object, there is always consciousness in our experience. That doesn't imply that when there is consciousness, there is always object. You see? So, but if when there is object, there is always consciousness, it means there is only consciousness. Right?
Thank you.
Francis, I would like to come back to the breathing exercises.
Breathing exercises.
Yeah. I'm actually very happy that these last weeks you have been, we have been doing a lot of these. I think it's a great, it appeals a lot to me. And we talked about this before. Whenever I do pranayama, or often when I do pranayama, as soon as I start elongating the inhale and the exhale, the breathing will become very shallow. And I once talked about this to you, and you said, well, if you stop breathing, the body will, from itself, start breathing again. But
yeah, you are still with us.
Yes. What do I want to say about that? As soon as this elongation of inhale and exhale starts, the breathing diminishes, or it's as if it's stopping, and it intensifies the experience of presence very strongly. And so why would I go on elongating my inhale and my exhale? It's as if it's stopping to happen.
Yeah, but I said it's just we elongate the inhale and the exhale just slightly. But then we allow for the body to find a new tempo, a little bit as if we were in deep sleep. But then if the body changes the tempo, that's fine. It's just to go into this mode which is totally transparent. And it's very different, for instance, from the way you breathe when you sing. That's very important to understand that when I blow into my clarinet, because there is a lot of support, course, as we say, and it's very different, right? It's almost the opposite. You couldn't play you couldn't even play the recorder. You see what I mean?
Sure.
It's about just letting it, and it's as immaterial as possible. That's the idea.
Yes.
to make it ethereal.
It's like it is there already.
Yeah, so then you let the space breathe for you, and
It's like as soon as I go with my attention to the breathing, that there is a kind of an injection.
yeah,
of
the attention is not on the breathing; it's on the space, on the
Yes.
transparency.
Yeah,
No, I say that because
Yeah,
you say
that's-
the attention to the breathing.
yeah. You when you start the exercise, you put your
Yes,
attention
but
to it.
then we go on automatic with
Yeah.
the breathing. Then we forget the breathing. The attention is on the space.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
The attention in the beginning is just to make it as transparent as possible.
Yeah.
In other words, a mistake would be to focus on the breathing. That would be the yogic Hatha Yoga approach. It's just the opposite. We make sure that the breathing is as inconspicuous as transparent as possible. And in order to do that, in fact, we focus on the space.
Yeah.
And then we focus on the space, not on the breathing. And the breathing goes on automatic, on whatever tempo the body chooses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this the rest after the exhale, we have to feel that we are completely tapering off into the.
Yes.
And then there is no urge to inhale, you know, because it's this. In ignorance, we are always anticipating, always, and we freak out if the lungs are empty because we feel I'm dying, you know. So the fear, when you are in a condition of fear, two things happen: is that we don't allow for the lungs to go naturally empty, peacefully empty. And there is a fear of death if we do that. And then we want to inhale immediately to be safe so that we can face the aggression or something else. So here that's the opposite. We allow ourselves, we relax and we allow ourselves to exhale completely, and there is no emergency to inhale. So the body chooses this inhale. So we have to go in this mode of automatic by feeling that we are not breathing, but it is really the space that does the breathing, because that's the truth. In other words, any phenomenon in nature is a universal convergence of the forces of nature in some point in space. So our breathing is a natural phenomenon, meaning a phenomenon in nature, which means that what is taking place is in fact a universal convergence in this dance.
Yes.
So we have to understand that if someone tells us, okay, or if we tell ourselves the objection, well, that's completely childish to see what Francis says, that the space breathes. Obviously, it's not the space that breathes. Obviously, it's my body. No. Francis is more right. It is not my body which is breathing. It is the universe which is breathing, and that includes the body.
Yes.
You see? So what we are doing, when we are doing that, we are not artificially changing the representation we have of breathing from something which was rational, scientific, into something which is childish. No, we are just doing the opposite. We were moving from a model of local breathing that was incomplete, that was unscientific, to a model which is a better description of the reality of what is going on. You see, that's very important to understand that we are not, that we are in fact realigning this natural processes with the reality of nature. We are realigning them.
So if this happens almost instantaneously, I just let it happen.
What happens instantaneously?
I mean, with elongating the inhale and the exhale, there is an almost or very soon this shallowing of the breathing, and this almost falling away of the breathing is happening.
Well, as I said in this answer I gave you, you're not going to stay in this space after the exhale forever. The body is going to require air at some point. You know, there is a very strong, natural
It's almost not noticeable. It's like
it's really about letting go of the control. So because what you're describing is not completely natural. There is still some residual element of control. And sometimes trying to let go of control is a form of control. Are you following me?
Yes, I understand you.
But the point I'm making is that natural breathing, well, there is an exhale and there is an inhale. You know, there is not an exhale and then we stop forever, because then it's called the last exhale.
No, it's of course it's not stopping forever.
So then I don't see what your question is when you say is that correct? Me. You say is that okay, or because I thought
no, I was just it was just about the I understand, it's okay.
I don't understand, but that's okay.
It just happens fairly quickly that.
Francis, just in relation to the last question, I was wondering if when I was doing this exercise, I always feel like when the exhale ends, I wait there in a relaxed manner for the inhale to come in. And what I've experienced time and time again is that there's the only clue that I get that the body needs to inhale is like a gentle kind of sensation. I cannot articulate it more than that, but it just feels okay. You know, it's like a signal almost. And the other thing I wanted to check with you is that there's still this sense of I am breathing in at that point, and I know you have pointed us in other exercises to also clear this sense that I am breathing.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could, is it just to be aware of that's happening, or?
Yeah, this little sensation that is kind of wants to inhale this little sensation is part of the various bodily sensations that are associated with the breathing process. And so it's normal in the beginning to kind of focus onto the sensations themselves. But then we are still trying, by focusing onto them unknowingly, to control. So then we have to defocus from them and really see that it is the space that does the breathing. So that the notion that there is an inside and an outside kind of disappears. You see? That's a model that is very intellectual, that has some value for a lung doctor, yes. But for us, that's the wrong model. The perfect model is one in which there is no separation between the chest and the outside. And it is the totality of space that does the breathing. Because those sensations are appearing in the space. And the idea is to release to the space the bodily sensations associated with the breathing.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple other questions. The knowing that consciousness is real, or I am real, and you said that it's not a liberating glimpse because it doesn't give us that it is universal. The universality of consciousness is self-evident and is not phenomenal. When that is seen, that consciousness is universal, it is just an inner knowing. It's not phenomenal. Is that?
Yes. Anything we learn about consciousness is non-phenomenal. But it is the same of reality, because reality is non-phenomenal. We know that there is reality through consciousness. So consciousness has to be as real as the reality it knows.
So
that which knows reality has to be as real as the reality it knows. That's very important to see. Because something which is not real cannot perceive that which is real. An illusion cannot perceive reality. For instance, a thought cannot perceive the thinker of the thought. The thinker of the thought perceives the thought, but the thought doesn't perceive the thinker. Because the thought is not as real as the thinker of the thought.
That seems to connect with that ultimately, like the inquiry that we walk through. Like, for instance, you said the reality of consciousness is consciousness, and
yeah.
And one question I have about
consciousness to the n power equals consciousness.
This inquiry has no place to begin but what I consider myself to be I. There is nowhere else that this... I guess what I wanted to clarify is the inquiry always begins with me, that I as consciousness am real, and then how we walk through the argument that there is only one reality, and hence I am that reality, or consciousness is the reality. So ultimately I have to always begin and come back to that experience. There is no other option.
Could you, I am not getting, could you try to be more explicit? And what is your question?
So, to put it in another way, if I say that the reality of consciousness is consciousness, I feel that my mind is satisfied with that. It's inevitable. I've satisfied myself with that intellectually. And the sense I have now is there is a deep sense of relaxation.
So, if the reality of consciousness is consciousness, then the other missing part is to be convinced that there is only one reality. Because then, if there is only one reality, then we go back to a perfect logical sequence of statements. If there is only one reality, and if the reality of consciousness is consciousness, then consciousness is this one reality. That's the conclusion, right? Yes. So we need to make sure that the two statements that come before that are true, are experientially true for us. So one, that the reality of consciousness is consciousness, and two, that there is only one reality.
So when you say that it has to be true for us experientially, for me the argument that there is one reality is inevitable based on how you've described that the moment an interaction happens, there is an overlap or oneness. There is an underlying reality which is the same.
Yeah.
So that is clear. So is there more to that experientially?
No, but you could also verify this, another theorem about reality, that reality square equals reality in this sense. In other words, that the reality of reality is this reality, just as the reality of consciousness is consciousness, but the reality of a reality is this reality. That's very important, because often why is that important? Because we often have to a priori envision a plurality of realities, right? So then, if you have a reality R, and the reality of this reality R is R itself, it will considerably reduce the field of realities, right? Yes. And so that this theorem, if you will, is interesting as a reducing tool that enables us to reach a conclusion that there is only one reality.
Yes, could one say that if one is talking about like this nested set of realities or sub-realities, the moment we realize that there is one underlying realities, it kind of nullifies this whole conversation of sub-realities, because if there is an underlying reality, there cannot be sub-realities.
Yeah. Another interesting theorem in this regard is if R square equals R, it follows that R to the n power equals R, right? So that also reduces considerably the number of realities. Through induction reasoning, if r square is equal to r, you multiply both terms by r, so you have r to the third equals r square equals r, etc. So
it's the immutability of r.
It's induction, you know.
Okay. So
No,
this inquiry
everybody is asleep now. Right?
So this inquiry has, now that I'm convinced, or have been convinced for some time, it has the sense of relaxation. I guess my question was, is there contemplatively, is there more I can do with that, or I just have to...
No, you use these tools only in case you have upcoming objections, logical or objections that come up. I give you more tools to because sometimes objections can come that are more, I wouldn't say refined, but more intricate. So you need powerful tools to resolve those, and then you go back to being satisfied. At which point you put the tools in the toolbox. I don't open my toolbox unless somebody asks questions. So when you teach, you need your toolbox ready. But I think people who are not in the business of teaching, their toolbox are somewhere in the attic. They don't use they don't use them. They are just happy living their lives. They say, yes, I remember a long time ago I was using those tools. Yes, they must be somewhere.
Thank you.
As the chef would say, once the can is open, you don't need the can opener. That's to help those who are asleep with my with r to the n power equals r.
Oui. Est-ce qu'on peut connaître sa véritable nature sans pouvoir répondre oui à la question la conscience est universelle? Ou est-ce que c'est l'un dérive
Can one knows one's true nature without being able to answer yes, the question, is consciousness universal? Obviously, if we cannot answer this question, let's rephrase that. To be happy, because that's the only thing that matters. We don't have to answer this question in a positive way. The question, is consciousness universal? We don't have to answer it yes. It is sufficient to truly not know the answer, to truly know that we don't know the answer. Because then, if we don't know the answer, it means we allow for consciousness to be whatever it truly is. So if it is universal, so be it. If it is not universal, so be it. But by being in this position of not knowing, we allow for consciousness to be what it truly is. And at every moment, what is there is always consciousness. So that's the beauty of the path, that we don't have to answer this question in a positive fashion. Not knowing is sufficient. Because even people who have had the most clear realization in one moment, then the next moment, this realization is twofold. One, some kind of event in their memory, right? But what is in their memory is what was before the event and what was after, what was phenomenal of it. Two, the experience of consciousness in this moment itself. So that everybody has it too. It is not reserved to those who have had this extraordinary glimpse of consciousness. The difference is those who have had the glimpse of consciousness, because of the glimpse, are challenging the views they have inherited from their culture. The power of the glimpse gives them the audacity to challenge the culture, to be culturally incorrect, if you will. And as a result, not to be swayed, not to be destabilized by the old belief system. It gives them some strength. But the same strength, you acquire it in the same way through your intelligence, through your reasoning and your understanding. And all that matters is to acquire this, what I would call the strength of not knowing. You see, the strength of allowing for consciousness to be universal. Truly allowing it by not being destabilized by the cultural fake news.
Tu avais commencé par dire c'est le bonheur qui est le plus important au départ, to be happy.
Yes, I started by making the statement that it is the happiness which is the most important. It's not to have had a glimpse. Because if you had a wonderful glimpse and if you're miserable, what's the point, you see? So ultimately the only thing that matters is happiness, it's like, it's happiness stupid. I mean, you don't understand that because you're not American, but here we understand that because of the economy.
Il me semble que je suis convaincu que la conscience est universelle et que c'est ce que je suis. Mais ça ne m'empêche pas je sais qu'il y aura encore une identification,
oui.
Des moments comme ça.
Yes. On the level of the mind, there is a transition that takes place from being having the conviction that it is personal, but this conviction to a conviction that it is universal. But on the level of the mind, this conviction can never be absolute. But in the moment itself, when you check it out, we can have the absolute conviction that we don't know, that there is no way of knowing phenomenally that it is limited. So that's very important. Because then we have this total, without the slightest doubt, certainty that there is no evidence that it is limited. And at the same time, we have this almost almost complete, but not complete certainty on the level of the mind that it is absolute. So that's sufficient for happiness. The mind can never be absolutely certain, but it can be sufficiently certain to be happy. Just as I said the other day, we cannot be absolutely certain that the sun is going to rise tomorrow, but for all practical purposes, well,
in the past, I've heard you talk about the experience of life force in the body.
experience of?
Life force in the body. You were talking about it as in reference to Kundalini pattern of sensation.
I think what I said is that as you get older, you have a lot of weird sensations in the spine.
Well, I remember you said that too, but this is from a video from a while ago. I remember. Basically, my question was: is the experience of life force or aliveness a noumenal experience?
What is life? Life is consciousness. What is alive in us? It's consciousness. When you see someone who has passed away, you see something is missing, right? The person is no longer there, so what's missing? You know, it's the same face, the same teeth, the same. But the life has left.
The reason I ask specifically is that sometimes I just I have an all-around feeling of aliveness, and I just wondered if that was a kind of inference of consciousness that I'm experiencing.
What is an
This I'm not feeling specific sensation, like specific localized sensations. I just feel an overall aliveness of the envelope of the body. It just feels like it's different than specific sensations, and my sense is that it may be an inference that I'm a knowing of consciousness.
That what?
An inference that I know I'm conscious through my body.
Mm. No. You know your body through consciousness. You don't know consciousness through your body. That's a total mistake. It's a mistake because it's not your experience. You know your body through consciousness. You don't know that you are conscious through your body. It's very important to understand that. That's fundamental. That which comes first is consciousness, not the body. Through consciousness, we know everything, including the body. Without consciousness, we wouldn't even know that there is a body. So if without consciousness we don't know that there is a body, how could we possibly know consciousness through the body?
Well, what I'm wondering is if I'm misinterpreting what
Yes,
this
you are.
experience is.
Go ahead.
What I mean is that I think that I'm misinterpreting that I think that I'm having sensation, but there's something else happening. But there's some other knowing that's happening. That's what I'm...
Yeah, but this knowing has no shape, no form, and that which knows everything is not a thing. Therefore, it doesn't have a color, a form. It is not a thought. It is not a bodily sensation. It is not a feeling. It's not a sense perception. It is. We have to. It is. It is very real. But it is unlike anything we see. But still, what I told you is very important to the correct interpretation that we know the body through consciousness and not consciousness through the body. It's very important to realize that what I have said is just the correct description of our experience.
Okay, yes, I understand that. So is it possible, like going back to I'm just wondering about inferences, like after the after effect of the knowledge, the knowing of ourselves as consciousness. There are sometimes inferences in the mind-body. There's a timeless experience, and then afterwards there's the mind-body.
I wouldn't call that an inference. I would call that a reaction, or a reaction of the body to that.
Okay, so is there a possibility that that's a reaction to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. The body reacts to a good news, the body reacts to a bad news. And the reactions are in opposite directions. So that's a glimpse of our true nature is the good news. You know,
because I would describe it as happiness in the body, is what it feels like.
Yes. The name of the gospel, right? In Latin and actually in Greek, because it's a Greek word. It's evangelos or angela. Anyway, it means the prefix EU means happy, and angelos means news. So that happy news, the happy news, you know, that Jesus was telling the happy news, and the happy news he was telling that I am is the truth, I am in the past, I am is the life. That was the good news, the happy news. So yes, upon hearing a happy news, the body reacts in a certain way. It relaxes, it opens. What is important is to still discriminate between the reaction of the body and the substance and the cause of this reaction. It is only the cause that matters, not the body. And the cause is consciousness.
Thank you.
When we sit quietly for an hour or so here, I don't want to call it meditation, because you said we should know when we're in meditation. And I think you defined it as you're not identified.
Yeah.
So when I said, it's kind of like a plane taking off, it's a little cloudy, kind of bumpy for a little bit, and then after a while it sort of clears somehow. But sometimes during that hour, I'll refer, I'm like a tool user. It feels like I'm out working on the plane a little bit. I'm like, oh, sensations. Oh, those aren't me. You know, I'll be doing things like that, and I kind of feel like I'm cheating, or, you know, I'm not. You know what I mean?
No, but then what... No, because at that moment, you are still not believing to be a separate entity, since you are questioning it, since you are putting it in question.
Yes.
Therefore, according to my definition of meditation, is what happens when we don't believe to be a separate entity.
Okay.
So in this case, if you will, with this definition of meditation, the inquiry, a true investigation, is part of the meditation.
Wonderful.
There could be another definition that I sometimes use, which is a little bit different, which is you first investigate, then you meditate. In other words, you investigate up until you reach an answer, an understanding. And then at that moment you are in meditation.
Yeah.
But then when you go again through the same thought process that led you to the understanding, you are already in meditation, because you kind of know already, because you have been there already. You have had this understanding already. So as you are on your way to the same understanding, you know already. It's like a city you have already visited.
Yes.
Right? You know the city is there.